I am so glad you convinced me that the family car should be the Defender 110. It is so beautiful inside. It's so comfortable and it just feels indestructible.
Yes, it really is. I've been waiting a long time for the new model to come out. The Defender 110, I'm telling you, it's my favorite car of all times. It's my third one. You know, I have stories of going off road. The guy managed the group. He was like, "What are you doing in this beautiful car?" I'm like, "I'm going off road." He's like, "Are you sure? Because you can use one of ours." And then they look like Mad Max cars. I'm like, "No, no, 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 we're going to do this." And he was shocked.
Wow. Well, it's great because the Defender has been reimagined for 21st century adventure, and its unparalleled off-road ability as well as its robust interior are invaluable whether you're headed towards uncharted territory or just a weekend of exploration. The Defender 110 tackles challenging surroundings with absolute confidence. The SUV conveys strength outside and in, featuring peerless technology like an intuitive driver display and an award-winning infotainment system. That's my favorite part, to keep you connected no matter where the journey takes you. Adventure is unique to everyone, and so is the Defender. Choose from the two-door Defender 90, the four-door Defender 110, or the larger Defender 130 with the ability to seat up to 8 passengers. You'll find uncompromising performance in all three. So pack up and go even further with the Defender 110. Learn more at LandRoverUSA.com/Defender.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show. Today on the James Altucher Show.
So originally, I brought Jeff Lerner on to help me with one of the Side Hustle Fridays. I hope you listened to this one. It was so valuable. It was about a week or so ago about how to set up a digital agency. I'm even trying to tell my own daughters, if you want to make money and start a business, but you don't have a lot of startup money, start a digital agency. That's how I started my first business in the 90s with zero money. I started a digital agency, and I asked Jeff Lerner, who had his own digital agency just fairly recently. He had 50 employees and tens of thousands of clients. I asked him to come on to Side Hustle Fridays to explain it, but we started talking before we started recording for Side Hustle Fridays, and he told me he had dropped out of high school to be a jazz pianist. And so I wanted to hear all about this, not only about dropping out of high school, which I fully respected, but also what are the skills needed to learn? He said he didn't even start playing the piano until he was 16 or 17, and within 2 or 3 years, he was a professional jazz pianist. So I wanted to find out, how did he learn it so fast? What are the skills to become like a great improviser on the piano or in music? Like, how did he learn music theory? Did he have a magical ear, which he didn't? And he told me, and it was just a fascinating story. So we're releasing it as a podcast. So here's the jazz pianist. So actually, Jeff, first, before we start, to be a jazz piano player, did you have to be really good at like improv?
Yeah, that was the name of the game, pretty much.
Like, could you hear a song, like a TV theme song, and just like start riffing around it on the piano?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that was
that
my
skill,
I was
or
fun
did you
at
have an
parties.
ear? Did you was that talent or skill? Like, did you have an ear right from the beginning, or did you have to build that skill?
I definitely had to build it. I mean, I had enough aptitude that I knew it would be worth investing the time. Like, I wouldn't try for years and not get it. I knew that, but you still have to build it. I'll tell you how I trained my ear. I'll tell you quickly, because I know that's not what we're here to talk about. But so there's only 12 intervals, right? There's like, a half step, a whole step, a minor third, a major third, a fourth, and so on. And every one of those intervals, we all have the ability to know what those intervals sound like. We just don't usually know the name for it. And I'll give you an example. Like, if I say, do you know the song The Way You Look Tonight? Frank Sinatra. Someday when I'm down and low. Yeah. Someday. Da da. Like, if I said, like, hum me the melody from that song, you'd get the first 2 notes, right?
Yeah.
You just may not realize you just sang a perfect fifth.
I see. So what would you do? Would you just
So I came up with a song for every interval. So like a half step, like for Elise, like hum me for Elise. Da 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 da. That's a half step.
Yeah.
So I just memorized the first two notes of a song for every single interval, and that's how over time I conditioned myself to just kind of learn what the intervals sounded like. First, it was what they sounded like, and eventually it became what they felt like.
Well, what do you mean? So like with For Elise, you would just remember those two notes, and then what would you do? You would riff. Then would you memorize the next two notes?
Well,
or
it's kind of like language. Like initially, you learn the specific symbols and how to cluster them together to form words, and eventually it just becomes automatic and it flows, and you create speech, right? So those were my building blocks, were intervals, and then more advanced combinations of intervals become chords.
but like you would also have to know the key everything was in, right? You'd have to know the interval plus the key.
Oh, totally. Yeah. There's more to it than just stacking intervals, but it's all math, but you have to train your ear to hear the math. But I mean, we could talk all about it at length, but I was very methodical. I had flashcards. I didn't start playing till I was 17 years old. So, and I was professional by 20.
Wow.
And I was I became a professional musician because I didn't want to ever have to get a job. And I'm like, this is something I can do to get paid enough to live. And so I went on I dropped out of high school and I went full on 10 hours a day, self-taught. I will become a professional musician, but I know I'm already 10 years behind. So how can I be as efficient and as effective as possible? I had flashcards. I mean, you could be like, Jeff, tell me, rattle off the notes of the C# melodic minor scale, and I'll just do it. I mean, I learned the math because one of the things I realized is my hands are always going to be a decade behind. The mechanics of playing the piano are something that it's so much easier to start developing before you go through puberty. Because then as your muscles and your connective tissues grow, they're already pliable and they're already doing those things. Because I was 10 years behind, I knew that I had to be better up here because I would never be as good down here.
That's so interesting. And then did it get to a point where you would hear a song and you would say, oh, okay, that's a C# minor fifth or whatever?
Yeah, I never fully nailed perfect pitch. Perfect pitch is the one thing that I truly do believe is either you got it or you don't. But what I got good at is referential pitch placement. Like right now, I was listening to a song this morning that was Mercy by Muse. I was listening to it at the gym. I can still hear it, and I happen to know it starts on the 4 chord in G, which means I still have a C ringing in my ear, so to speak. So I have a reference point, and I'll have it for the rest of the day. So I could tell you any other note, I could tell you any other chord. But if you give me, if I don't hear any music for a week, for example, I lose that.
Would you, let's say you're a professional, would you have a fake book? So if someone said, hey, play, whatever, I don't know. But
yeah, play Misty, play The Way You Look Tonight, play What a Wonderful World. Play, yeah,
so the fake book is just like the chords. And then how would you start thinking about coming up with the song around those chords? Like you had a kind of a standard bunch of, okay, this is a minor third of a C. Here's what I usually play for that.
Yeah. You learn every note in relationship to every other note in any possible combination of all notes. You attribute a specific mathematical function. And some people don't learn this way. Some people I think are much more instinctive than me. I understood music intellectually before I really internalized it. It's just my process. So yeah, I mean, if I have a tune, What a Wonderful World, now I know that when it goes da 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 da, when it hits that note, it lifts and it goes it does a 3-6-2-5-1 cadence. So if I know what key we're in, I know what that is. I know what are the logical substitutions for those chords. I know what are the interesting color tones you can add on top of those chords to jazz it up.
Like let's say it was just real basic, like it's a C chord is kind of the skeleton, the backbone of a song. How would you start to enhance that?
Typically the first thing you do is you add a seventh. So your basic major triad is 1-3-5. It's the root, the third, and the fifth of any whatever key you're in.
So C, E, G.
Yes. So if I want to kind of start to spice it up a little, first thing I'd probably do is add a B, which is the 7th.
Yeah.
And that's going to immediately soften it and give it a little more of a jazz feel. Now, if I add a B flat, I'm out of the key at that point. Now what I've done is I've created the dominant chord. I've slipped into F major. So as soon as I turn the B to a B flat, it wants to resolve to F, which is the 4 chord. So, but I might add like an F sharp to a C chord, and that's going to give it this spacey, it's called the Lydian mode. It's going to give it like this spacey feel that you hear in like classic rock music. I could add an A, which would be the 6, and then it's going to sound like more like Scott Joplin, like ragtime, major 6 chords. I can go from there. I mean, I could add a C sharp, which is going to give you a minor 9th, which is the most dissonant interval, and it's going to sound like a wrong note unless you resolve it creatively. Then it sounds really cool.
What do you mean by resolve it? Like, because you can't use any note. Like, let's say you do the B flat, so now you're in the F chord. What does it mean to resolve in a pleasant way?
There's the loaded interval. I mean, you sound like you know enough about music to be dangerous.
I read music for piano as a kid, but not, in 30 years.
So the key to understanding how music tends to cycle through, or I would say a key, it's kind of like maybe the most basic element of tension and resolution, is what they call tritones, which is a flatted 5th. And so if you take a C chord, C, E, G, and you add the minor 7th, which is B flat, the reason it wants to resolve is because the relationship between the E and the B flat is a minor 5th. It's a tritone. That interval either wants to collapse in or it wants to expand out. So the natural, think about it, if you take, are you following, like you can picture that kind of C, E, G, B flat?
Yeah.
And the E and the B flat is what's called a tritone, and it wants to collapse in. So when it collapses in, if you take an E and move it up and a B flat and move it down, what do you get?
Like a F or a G?
You get an F and an A. And that is the 1st and the 3rd of the F major chord. So that tritone is really dissonant and it wants to collapse in. And that is actually why the dominant chord, which is when you make the 7th minor, why it wants to collapse to a major 4 chord, because that tritone just releases. It's the language is esoteric. It's hard to describe, but but
that's interesting. So sorry for the questions on this, but I'm really curious, and then we'll. So let's say I don't know what Twinkle Twinkle Little Star is. I feel like that's like a C chord.
Yeah, and that's another 5th. I think that was actually the tune I used for a 5th. Da 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 da. That's a 5th.
And so let's say something's in the C chord. What did it mean? You just hit like after you play the C chord, you just go straight to a B flat, and then how do you kind of melodically resolve? Like what does it mean? Like I hear what you're saying. Like it wants to move into the F or the A, but how do you do that so it's musical? So it feels like it's still part of the song. That's you're still saying the language of the song.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is driven by the idiom, like Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, nursery rhyme type tune. Kids sing along. You want to keep it pretty basic. I mean, da 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 da. I mean that the da da, the A, the 6th. Theoretically, you'd probably just keep it over the C major triad, because a lot of harmonic shifting isn't going to feel very nursery rhymey, right? It's not going to feel like kids' music.
But that's okay. I'm just thinking from a jazz perspective.
Yeah, but if you wanted to be like real crazy, if you wanted to be bluesy, you would make that A the 3rd of a dominant of an F minor, an F dominant chord. So it'd be like a dominant 4 chord. If you wanted to be, classic rocky, you might move it up to a D major, make it the 5th of a D major chord, because then you're going to bring in that F sharp, which is going to have that open Lydian sound against the C, original key of C. You could make it the root of an A dominant chord, which would become what's called a secondary dominant that wants to resolve to D minor, which is the 2.
So what would that sound like? if you can rough. I know it's not easy to do it with just
No,
humming.
hey, I mean, listen, do you guys have time? Like, dude, I love this stuff. If you're not in a hurry.
No, I'll make this like a little mini podcast.
Oh, is he gonna break out his? Oh no, is it a Steinway?
Yeah. Okay, so that's like one option. That's like a pretty tonal option. So you got your C.
So that's just taking the chords that you might see in a fake book and simply playing them with some effect.
Yeah, what I did though is I expanded the chord. So I took this is called an inversion. So by moving the bass from the root to the third, I create what's called a first inversion. And then I open the chord up by doing fifth, root, fifth. So the only place the third exists is in the bass. And that gives kind of a lighter feel that. And so, everything just has a feel about it. So in that, if you were like, hey, play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. And then I might want to blues it up. So what I did was I took the 4 chord, but I flatted the 7th.
So wait, so the 4 chord, the F chord, what's the 4 chord in this case?
It's F. It would be F major, but I added an E flat. And I could also go. So now that's like a gospel move. F7. Move the bass up to an F sharp, make it an F sharp diminished. And then so there I go to like a minor 4, which has a certain feel inside of a major key.
So a minor 4 in this case would be F, A flat. What would the minor fourth
so
be?
a minor 4/6 would be F, A flat, C, and D, which is actually an inversion of a half diminished chord on the 2, D, F, A flat, C. And that just has, this would be like a gospel treatment. That would probably work well. And I could even go secondary dominant. So now I'm on an A7. And then I would go 2-5-1.
What do you mean 2-5-1?
So 2-5 is going to be a D minor chord, followed by a G dominant chord. And then instead of going to the 1, there's some false resolutions.
That's cool. So what was that first chord in the false resolution?
That was an A flat major chord. So you take the minor 6 and build a major triad off of it, and then the third of that chord is the root of your key. And because you're using an A flat, which implies a minor tonality, but it's still a major chord, it kind of gives it this weird shift. So again, let me do that from scratch. And especially even on this chord, if I flat the 7th, what did I do? Hold on, let me try to remember what I did.
Man, that's great. And so when you're playing one key at a time, you're just playing the keys of the chord. Like sometimes you play the chord and sometimes you play the keys of the chord.
Yeah. And the beautiful thing about the piano is you can be the bass player, the melody player, and the rhythm, the fill player at the same time. So I'm thinking bass line. I mean, I could do. Walk the bass line, right? And then you always got to hold down the melody, because if you lose the melody, nobody knows what you're playing anymore, unless you're.
So when you hold the melody, all right, like for instance, the first note's C, so you're playing around with the C chord. Then the second note's G, and do you start playing with the G chord, or?
No, because the G is still part of the C chord, and because I know I'm going to A, which is part of the 4 chord, it means if I'm still on a note that's in the C chord, and I know I'm going to a note that would fit in the 4 chord, it gives me an opportunity to set up that C7 to F resolution. So, but I could go, I mean, it would be a little weird to go straight to the 5. That would be a more basic treatment, to just go. So yeah, once you learn all the intervallic and harmonic implications of different chord functions within a key, and then you learn how those chords operate within certain genres, then it becomes like a playground.
And so what could I read? So obviously there's fake books which give you all the skeleton of all these songs, but what would be a good thing to learn? Like you were saying, to give it a gospel feel, to give it a jazz feel, to walk the melody and that kind of give it a really jazzy feel. Like you said, you spent a lot of time learning the intellectual aspects. I could start there.
I taught myself out of a book called The Jazz Piano Book by a guy named Mark Levine. And, look, there's a zillion books. I'm not going to say it's the best or the most inclusive, but I will tell you that like 95% of what I know about basic theory and how to apply it stylistically to different ways of playing the piano, I learned from that book.
That's really great.
And I spent a year like studying that, like you would study like an anatomy book for medical school. I mean, it was obsessive.
How many hours a day?
8 plus.
Wow, 8.
I dropped out of high school. I told my parents, there's nothing for me in high school. I want to play piano. I'm not going to go get a job. Save your money. Don't send me to college. Just buy. I said, but if you get me a piano, that would really help.
Were they like, Jeff, that's the stupidest idea I've ever heard. You got to get a high school degree.
They had been through the ringer with me so much at that point. I think they were just excited to see me excited about something.
And you hadn't even, were they like, Jeff, you don't even know, you can't even play 3 notes on a piano?
Well, I could play 3 notes, but I just couldn't play like 30 notes. I mean, I had played guitar previously. Like I could sit down and kind of clunk out Mary Had a Little Lamb. Like I was one of those total amateurs, but yeah, I mean, there was some skepticism, but.
What about your friends? Like, did you feel any peer pressure to say, like, did they say, hey,
oh
just
yeah, everybody thought
us?
I was insane. Everybody thought I was completely insane.
How did you have the inner guts to ignore friends, teachers, parents, guidance counselors, history, everything?
Yeah, like common sense. I don't have a great answer for that, man. Just a fierce independent streak. I've always been someone who responds really, I don't know if it's good or bad, but I respond aggressively to being told that I can't do things. So the people that may have been trying to protect me were actually making it worse by telling me that it wasn't a good idea and I wouldn't be able to do it. It just became like, I'll show you. And at the end of the day, I just knew I had one job when I was 16 years old. I worked at a law firm for 3 weeks. I was miserable. Everybody else there was miserable. And this is a high-end law firm. You know, there's people here making $1 million a year. Nobody's smiling. So I'm like, well, clearly that's not the solution. So I'm going to at least be free and make music.
So while you were studying 8 hours a day, were you doing anything else for a living or studying or?
No, my parents essentially had told me we were committed to paying for your life until you were 18. You know, you're a high school student, and now you're 16 and you've decided you want to be a piano player. So you've got 2 years.
Wow. And so after 1 year, how good were you?
I was good enough to get a very crappy gig where they paid me with a plate of food.
All right. And then after 2 years?
I don't know. I wasn't really that much better. Intellectually, I was better, but it just takes time for things to become natural, you know? When I was 20 is the first time I actually remember playing and people being like, hey, that guy's pretty good, you know?
Huh.
And when I was 17, no, I guess when I was 18, I started trying to audition for the piano performance department at University of Houston. And, you know, I was like, I wasn't even dealing with the fact that I didn't finish high school. I was just like, well, if I'm good, they'll let me in. And I got denied, 6 semesters in a row. So it took me 3 years. But after 3 years of being self-taught and actually going and finishing my GED on my own, I was able to actually get in, and I ended up getting a full scholarship in jazz piano performance and never ended up paying for school.
Wow. So then you, after all of those years of studying on your own, you then studied it and got a degree in it.
I did. Yeah. I graduated with a degree in music composition with an emphasis in jazz piano performance, because they didn't actually offer a jazz piano degree. Otherwise I would have just done that. And then I minored in finance too, because my dad's a money manager. So I thought he'd be happy.
So if someone wanted to, basically, I hate to use the phrase, but skip the line on, spending 3 years learning the math. Like when I was a kid, I spent 10 years taking piano lessons, but just learning how to sight read, which is very unfulfilling ultimately, I found. And I always wanted to, like, ever since I was a kid, do like kind of what you just did, like that kind of style. What would be like a shortcut so I don't have to spend 8 hours a day for 3 years?
Yeah,
if there is one.
There's a difference between wanting to go play a gig where you have to go sit there for 2, 3, or 4 hours and play one song after the other and take requests and chat with people while you're playing. So, that's another level. But if you just want to be able to play enough for personal fulfillment, you can do it in a year. If you just, and frankly, what I've learned since is if I had practiced 2 to 4 hours a day with great focus and intention, it would have done probably just as much as 8 to 10 hours a day. There's a major point of diminishing returns cognitively for me, for anybody, I think, with music. I was bored / desperate / on a mission. So I went overkill, but in a few hours a day for a year, I would imagine you could get to where you could hear a tune on the radio, pick it out, add some chords to it, and have a lot of fun and impress your friends.
So let's say I'm going to shortcut that now. So let's say I had a fake book. So I don't have to pick out, the critical parts just by hearing. It's all written out for me. And let's say I focus on one genre. Like clearly, the languages of every genre. This is gospel. This is blues. This is jazz. If I was to kind of make a hammer so that everything's a nail,
right?
What would be like the genre you would pick to just really study that and those chord transitions and so on?
I would probably go rock, unless you have a deep passion. Well, the problem with classical music is it's so fleshed out in terms of ornamentation and instrument and complexity. There's really no way to just do it really simple. Rock music, you can be super simple with. I mean, you can sit down and play a Beatles tune and have great fun doing, the equivalent of strumming a guitar, where you're just holding basic chord shapes, with your hands and just playing them. And the first not sort of inescapable piece of complexity that you're going to have to deal with to do that is you're going to have to get to where you can play a chord and using mostly these 3 fingers still play the melody. Wow. I guess actually that's not true. At a most basic level, you could just play the chord with your left hand in a root position, meaning you've got the root of the chord at the bottom, and then just play the melody with your right hand and have a great fun. Yeah, actually, I don't even know that you have to spread it across your 2 hands. Just play chords with your left hand and the melody with your right hand, and you could be rocking in a few months.
And with the melody, is that where you're doing all the transitions? Like you're going to play the seventh and the minor fourth? And
well, to do that stuff is probably creating a little more coordination between the hands, because sometimes you're creating 3, 4, 4, 5, 6 note chords. But again, that's why rock is nice, because rock doesn't use a lot of these color tones that complicate the chord structures. You could basically play 90% of rock tunes with just major and minor chords in your left hand and the melody in your right hand.
Yeah, but I like what you were doing with Twinkle Twinkle Little Star with all these different transitions. Does that
you gotta pick your poison. You said you wanted it. You want the shortcut, or you want to do the hard thing?
Is that the super hard thing? Is there is that like just learning, oh, it's okay to go from the major to the fourth minor and then back to the and then resolve it and then go back to the melody or whatever. Like, what are those? What's that language?
I mean, jazz is such a great place to start because it's all theory based. Like it's actually, I mean, people I think tend to dismiss jazz as like it's this fringe thing that like poor black people started doing 100 years ago, and whatever people's worldview is. Dude, jazz is sick. It is like genius level stuff where they took the math that started to emerge from musical theater, and they basically just said, how far can we take this? But the cool thing about it is when you're learning the jazz basics, you're learning the real principles that drive music. Because any music form that's based on the ability to improvise has to be based on principles rather than memorization. And that's what's so powerful about jazz to me, is you learn why things do what they do and why they sound how they sound. And when you start to do that, then you have the ability that you're talking about to treat it like a language, like a creation.
And so do you think I can learn that from the jazz piano book?
I did.
Excellent. Well, this is great. This is a mini podcast right
the
in
whole
the
other
can right
episode,
here.
right?
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for that, Jeff. And now we're going to talk about what you did after being a jazz pianist. So,
Totally.
Jay, that's a cut on that.
These days, we're all investors, trying to be smart with our money despite our worst impulses. But at iShares, we believe that deep down inside of every investor is a better investor. One that's just waiting to be let out. Explore iShares ETFs and insights and let your best investor out. Visit iShares.com for more information.